The sun burned over Broken Ridge like a brand pressed to the earth. The dust shimmered in the air, thick as breath, and the smell of sweat, horses, and gun oil hung heavy above the crowd. The wooden stage creaked in the middle of the square, where a trader with a red neck scarf and a snake's grin stood beside a tethered cow. He raised his arms and shouted, his voice booming across the town square. "Buy a cow, get a working Apache woman for free." Laughter rolled through the crowd like thunder. Boots stomped, spurs jingled. A group of ranch hands, whiskey drunk, hollered and clapped as if the man had just told the finest joke this side of the Rio Grande. Wyatt Reed didn't laugh. He stood near the edge of the square, hat pulled low, thumbs hooked in his worn leather belt. His shirt was faded, his face weathered and sun-bitten, carved by wind and time. A man could tell he'd seen things that stripped the shine off laughter. Folks around Broken Ridge called him the Widow Rancher. He owned a patch of dry land west of town. Nothing special, just a house, a barn, and a fence that never got finished. 3 years back, raiders had burned his home, and the fire had taken more than timber. It had taken the only two people he'd ever called family. Since then, he'd spoken little and trusted less. On the stage, a woman stood beside the cow. Her wrists were bound in coarse rope, her dark hair tangled with dust. A streak of dried blood traced her cheek, but her eyes, deep, black, unyielding, met the crowd without fear. "She ain't much to look at," the trader barked, jerking the rope. "But she can cook, mend, haul water, and work your stock like any man. Comes with the cow, free of charge. Who's first to make a real offer?" A burst of cruel laughter followed. One man whistled. Another spat and muttered something filthy. The woman said nothing. She stood tall, chin lifted, like a mountain that refused to bow. Wyatt shifted his weight. His hand brushed the revolver at his side. Not from threat, but out of habit. He felt the heat biting through his boots and the memory of flames flickered in his mind. His house, his wife's scream, the silence afterward. He turned to walk away. But then one of the ranch hands near the stage shouted, "Hell, I'll take the cow and toss the squad of the dogs." The laughter that followed wasn't just cruel, it was cheap. Something inside Wyatt snapped like a dry twig. He stepped forward through the dust. The crowd parted, curious, mocking. His boots echoed against the boards as he climbed the stage. The trader grinned, thinking he'd found another buyer. "Well now," the trader said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Didn't think the Widow Rancher still had a taste for—" Wyatt dropped 15 silver dollars on the table. The coins clattered loud enough to hush the crowd. The trader blinked. 15? That's 3 times the cow's worth." Wyatt's voice was low and steady. "I'll take both." The crowd chuckled again, whispering, "Looks like old Wyatt's got himself lonely. Maybe he needs someone to cook his beans." The trader leaned closer, eyes narrow. "You sure you know what you're buying, mister?" Wyatt looked at the woman. She met his gaze, not with thanks or fear, but with something he couldn't name, something proud, wounded, and wild. He turned back to the trader. "I know exactly what I'm buying." The man squinted, half drunk on power. "And what's that, Reed?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Her right to breathe." The words dropped like stones in water. No one laughed. Even the horses went quiet for a moment. The trader scratched the back of his neck, trying to play it off. "Well, hell, money's money. She's yours, cowboy." He cut the rope from her wrists and tossed it aside. The woman rubbed her raw skin but didn't thank him. She only watched him with wary eyes as he nodded toward his wagon. Wyatt climbed down first, motioning for her to follow. She hesitated. One glance at the crowd told her she was safer following the stranger than staying. As they passed through the square, whispers followed like snakes in grass. "Crazy old fool. She'll slit his throat by dawn. He's gone soft since that fire." Wyatt heard it all but said nothing. The woman's steps were silent beside him, light and measured, her bare feet leaving faint prints in the dust. When they reached the wagon, he handed her a canteen of water. She didn't take it at first, just looked at him with suspicion. "It's clean," he said. "Drink." Her cracked lips barely touched the tin, but she drank anyway. Slow, cautious sips. The water trembled in her hands. Wyatt hitched the cow behind the wagon and climbed onto the driver's bench. "Get in the back. We've got half a day's ride before dark." She stared at him, her voice rough but strong. "Why did you do this?" He looked straight ahead, taking the reins. "Because somebody should have." The whip cracked. The wagon rolled forward. The town faded behind them, swallowed by red dust and the whisper of wind. For miles they didn't speak. The only sounds were the squeak of the wheels, the lowing of the cow, and the long sighs of the desert. The land stretched endless, waves of dry earth, cactus, and bleached bones of cattle long dead. At one point, the woman shifted on the wagon bed. "You could have left me." Wyatt didn't look back. "Could have. You don't even know my name." He guided the reins gently, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Don't matter much today." She studied him for a long time, her dark eyes trying to read the man beneath the silence. Finally, she said, almost a whisper, "My name is Ihawi." Wyatt nodded once. "Wyatt Reed. Why did they call you Widow Rancher?" He hesitated. His voice came quiet, like wind through dry grass. "Because that's what I am." The road wound through a field of sagebrush, the air turning cooler as the sun leaned west. Shadows stretched long and thin across the plain. In the fading light, Ihawi's profile looked carved from stone, strong, unbroken, proud even in ruin. Wyatt found himself glancing at her, wondering what it took to keep eyes like that steady in a world so cruel. They passed an old wooden sign half buried in sand. "Lone Mesa Ranch, 2 miles west." "That yours?" she asked. "Was," he said. "Still standing, far as I know." "And you bought me to work there?" He shook his head. "No." "Then why?" Wyatt flicked the reins, his tone flat, final. "I told you already." The wagon rattled on until the town became a blur behind them. Broken Ridge shrank into a smudge of smoke and heat. Ahead lay the open desert, raw, golden, endless. As night began to fall, the first cool wind of evening brushed their faces. Ihawi pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. She looked at Wyatt once more, seeing not cruelty in him, but a man made of quiet edges, rough but not sharp, scarred but still alive. He didn't meet her eyes. He just kept his gaze on the horizon where the sky burned orange, then purple, then black. The road ahead was long. Dust swirled behind the wagon like ghosts following in silence. And somewhere in that stillness, in that endless sound of wheels over dry earth, began a story neither of them had planned. Two broken souls bound by accident, rolling toward a fate written in sand and blood. The wagon creaked as it climbed the long slope toward Lone Mesa. The dying sun bled across the desert, setting the horizon on fire. Wind swept through the sagebrush, whispering over the rocks, rattling the loose boards of an old fence that led to a lonely stretch of land few men ever cared to see twice. Wyatt Reed guided the horse with slow, steady hands. His shoulders ached, his throat was raw from the dust, but he didn't complain. He never did. Behind him, the woman sat silent beneath a wool blanket, her dark hair tangled by wind, her eyes fixed on the endless stretch of land. When they reached the ridge, the ranch finally appeared. A sagging barn, a small log house with one window cracked, a water trough, and a half-built fence that ended abruptly halfway around the corral. The place looked half dead, but it still stood, defying wind, sun, and time. The old hound, Boone, limped out from under the porch, barking once before recognizing his master. His tail wagged weakly as he trotted toward the wagon. "Easy, boy," Wyatt said, sliding down and patting the dog's head. "Still keeping watch, huh?" Boone sniffed the air, then looked at Ihawi. The fur along his back rose slightly, but Wyatt snapped his fingers, and the dog backed off, obedient but wary. "Go on in," Wyatt said, nodding toward the cabin. "Ain't much, but it's dry." Ihawi hesitated at the door, her bare feet sinking into the red dust. She expected a lock, chains, something. There was none. Wyatt pushed the door open and stepped aside for her to enter first. The air inside smelled of wood smoke and solitude. A single lantern flickered on the table beside a loaf of hard bread, a tin cup, and a half-full jug of water. The walls were bare except for a faded photograph of a woman holding a small child, both faces ghosted by sun and time. Wyatt set his hat on a hook and spoke without looking at her. "Eat, rest. You're safe here. No one's gonna touch you." He said it plain, like a fact, not a kindness. Then he poured water into the tin cup and slid it toward her. Ihawi's hands trembled slightly as she took it. She drank in silence, studying him from across the table. The lamplight carved his face in sharp lines, a man shaped by work, grief, and dust. His eyes were gray, distant, like thunderclouds that never broke. "Why do you live alone?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he broke a piece of bread, chewed once, and said, "Easier that way." She looked around the cabin again. No curtains, no laughter, no smell of cooking, just the creak of the wood and the slow breathing of a house that had seen too much waiting. Boone lay near the hearth, his head on his paws, watching her with half-open eyes. The woman crouched beside him, reaching her hand slowly. The dog sniffed, then licked her palm once, as if deciding she wasn't a threat. "Good boy," she whispered. Wyatt watched that small exchange and felt something shift in the air. Not warmth exactly, but the faint stirring of it. He cleared his throat. "You can sleep inside, I'll stay by the door." Her brow furrowed. "You don't trust me?" He shrugged. "I don't trust much of anything anymore." Outside, the desert wind howled through the posts of the unfinished fence, sounding almost like a cry. When night came, Wyatt spread a blanket near the door, leaned his rifle against the wall, and lay back with his hat over his face. The fire in the stove burned low, painting the room in orange light. Ihawi lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft breathing of the old dog and the steady rhythm of Wyatt's boots shifting on the floor. For the first time in many nights, she wasn't bound. No chains, no shouting men, no fear of dawn. Just silence, a silence heavy enough to make her eyes sting. Her mind drifted to her village, ashes now scattered across Red Mesa. She remembered her mother's singing, her brother's laughter, the smell of cedar smoke. It all seemed impossibly far, swallowed by the same wind that now brushed against the cabin walls. Across the room, Wyatt stirred in his sleep. His hand twitched toward the rifle, then relaxed again. Even resting, he looked like a man expecting ghosts to walk through the door. Morning came gray and cold. Wyatt was already outside, chopping wood by the corral. The swing of the axe echoed off the mesa, steady and deliberate. Ihawi stepped onto the porch, wrapped in the same blanket from the wagon. Boone followed at her heels. She watched him work. The muscles in his back moved beneath a sweat-stained shirt, each motion precise, almost mechanical. "You work like a soldier," she said. He paused, wiped his brow with his sleeve. "Used to be one, a long time ago." "What made you stop?" He split another log clean down the middle. "Didn't like the company." She smiled faintly for the first time. It wasn't amusement, it was recognition. "Men who kill and call it justice?" Wyatt met her gaze. There was a flicker of something, guilt, memory, maybe both. "Something like that." He stacked the last piece of wood and leaned on the axe handle. "You can stay till you're well. After that, you decide what's next." "And if I decide to leave?" "Then you leave. No cage." He shook his head. "Never did like cages." Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "You sound like a man who's built a few." Wyatt didn't reply. He just turned toward the corral, where the half-built fence stretched like a broken line across the dust. That evening after supper, hard beans and cold bread, they sat outside under a sky streaked with red. The air smelled of dry grass and smoke from the lantern. Ihawi's hair glowed bronze in the sunset, her face calm but unreadable. She spoke first. "Your land is wide, but it feels empty." Wyatt nodded. "It used to feel full. What happened?" He stared toward the horizon. "Fire." She didn't ask more. She didn't have to. Pain recognized pain. The night settled in, warm and silent except for the crickets. Wyatt went inside, sat by the window, and stared out toward the unfinished fence. The same fence he'd started building the day before his life turned to ash. Ihawi walked over, stopping behind him. The lantern light flickered against the scars on his hands. "You never finished it," she said. He kept his eyes on the fence posts. Didn't see the point. Her voice was gentle, but it cut through the quiet like a whisper of wind through dry grass. Maybe it's not the fence that needs finishing. He looked up at her, searching for what she meant, but she'd already turned toward the window, watching the stars blink alive over the desert. Later that night, Ihawi stood by the small window. The air was cool, the scent of rain faint somewhere beyond the hills. She looked out at the dark land, the fence line ending in shadows, the open field stretching to nothing. "What are you building out there?" she asked softly. Wyatt, half asleep near the door, answered without opening his eyes. "Something I never got to finish." She waited for more, but none came. The silence filled the room again, soft, tired, alive. Outside, the wind moved through the sagebrush, and for the first time, it didn't sound like mourning. It sounded almost like breathing. Two souls, broken in different ways, had found themselves in the same quiet house. Both too hurt to speak it, both too human not to feel it. And somewhere between the shadows and the desert wind, the lonely ranch on the mesa began to stir again. Morning came slow to Lone Mesa. A pale light crept over the hills, touching the dry grass and the rough boards of the barn. The smell of hay, horse sweat, and the cool of dawn drifted through the open window. Ihawi woke to the sound of hooves striking dirt. She rose quietly, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders, and peered outside. Wyatt was already at work. He moved with that steady rhythm of a man who'd been up before the sun his whole life. He forked hay into the trough, checked the horses' hooves, patted their flanks with the same calm strength he used for everything. He didn't look toward the house, but he knew she was watching. "Coffee's on the stove," he called without turning around. His voice, rough, deep, without a hint of sleep, startled her. She hesitated, then poured herself a cup. It was strong and bitter, but it warmed her hands. For a moment, she watched him through the doorway, the golden light cutting across his face, catching in his beard. There was no cruelty there, no drunken smirk, no hunger in his eyes, just a man doing what had to be done. Still, she stayed guarded. The desert had taught her, kindness could turn on you faster than a rattlesnake. Down in Broken Ridge, word traveled faster than the wind. By mid-morning, Sheriff Clayton Morris was sitting behind his desk, boots propped on a whiskey crate, listening to a gossiping rancher. "You heard right," the rancher said. "That widow rancher fella, Wyatt Reed, bought himself an Apache woman, paid 15 silver for her like she was prize stock." Morris leaned back, the leather chair groaning beneath him. His grin was slow, sharp. "Well, I'll be damned. Guess the desert's been lonely for Reed after all." But his eyes darkened at the name. There was history there, a deep scar. Wyatt Reed was the man who'd once stood up in front of the county court and accused Morris of selling out homesteads along the river to a band of land thieves. Wyatt's complaint had gone nowhere, buried under missing papers and paid silence, and Morris had never forgotten. He stood, tightening his gun belt. "Let's ride. I want to see this Apache woman myself." Two deputies followed him out into the street, their spurs clinking in the dust. By noon, the sound of hooves echoed up the trail to Lone Mesa. Wyatt heard it before he saw them. He was fixing a broken fence post when Boone's bark cut through the air. He straightened, squinting into the sunlight. 3 riders, one in a star-pin vest. He muttered, "Damn vultures." When they reached the yard, Sheriff Morris dismounted first. Tall, heavy-set, with a face that wore its authority like a badge and its sins like a shadow. "Well, look who's gone charitable," Morris said, grinning as he looked around. "Didn't take you for the kind to bring company home, Reed." Wyatt leaned on his hammer. "Didn't take you for the kind to ride all this way without reason." Morris's eyes slid toward the house. "Word in town says you bought a woman." "Word in town says a lot of things," and Wyatt replied. "I like to see for myself." Before Wyatt could stop him, Morris stepped toward the door. Boone growled low, hackles rising. "Easy, boy," Wyatt said. The sheriff pushed the door open and froze. Ihawi stood inside, calm but firm, a bowl of water in her hands. The air between them went cold. Morris stared, his grin fading. "Well, well, she's got fight left in her." He stepped closer. "What's your name, girl?" She didn't answer. "I asked you a question." Her eyes locked onto his, dark and steady. "My name doesn't belong to you." Morris's jaw flexed. "Where you come from?" She held his gaze. "From a place your men burned to the ground." The room went silent. Boone growled again, low and dangerous. Wyatt stepped forward, placing himself between them. His voice was flat, controlled. "That's enough." Morris turned to him, smirking. "What's this, Reed? You playing savior now? First you accuse me of crimes, now you're hiding enemies of the state?" "She's no enemy," Wyatt said. "She's a person, one trying to stay alive." "Alive!" Morris barked a laugh. "Half her kind's lucky to still have skin left on their bones. They're thieves, killers, and—" "I said that's enough." Wyatt's tone sharpened like the click of a gun being cocked. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Dust drifted in the doorway, sunlight cutting the tension into shreds. Morris finally took a step back, adjusting his vest. "Careful how you talk to lawmen, Reed. Some folks might think you forgot which side you're on." Wyatt's eyes never left him. "Maybe I did. The side I was on burned my house and my family while the law looked the other way." The sheriff's smirk faltered. For a moment something flickered behind his eyes. Shame, maybe, or just annoyance. "You always did talk too much." He turned and walked out, brushing past Boone, who snarled under his breath. The deputies followed, silent as shadows. Before mounting his horse, Morris looked back one last time. "You'd do well to remember, Reed. A man who shelters savages ain't got much of a future. Around here, that kind of mercy will get you buried right beside them." Wyatt didn't answer. He just watched as the riders disappeared down the trail, the sound of hooves fading into the dry wind. When the dust settled, Ihawi stepped onto the porch. Her face was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. Boone pressed against her leg as if sensing it. Wyatt walked to the fence, gripping the top rail hard enough for the wood to creak. "He was one of them," she said softly behind him. "The night they came for my people. I remember his voice." Wyatt's jaw tightened. He said nothing. "Why do you let him walk away?" she asked. He stared out over the barren land, the red mesa glowing under the sun. "Because he still wears a badge, and killing him wouldn't change what's already gone." She studied his back for a moment, then said, "It would stop him from doing it again." Wyatt turned then, meeting her eyes. "Maybe, but it'd burn this place to the ground before the week's out." The silence between them stretched, heavy but not hostile. Two people bound by the same kind of loss, both trying to live without being consumed by it. Finally, she said, "He'll come back." "I know. And when he does?" Wyatt glanced at Boone, then back to her. "Then we'll be ready." She nodded once, her chin lifting slightly, the same defiance he'd seen when she stood on that auction block. The wind picked up again, carrying a swirl of dust across the yard. It wrapped around them like a ghost, whispering through the unfinished fence, through the cracks of the old barn, through the open wounds of memory neither could close. Wyatt looked at the land, then at her. "There's a lot of ghosts buried here," he said quietly. Ihawi turned her gaze toward the horizon. "Then let's not let them rest easy." The sun dipped lower, and the desert fell back into silence, haunted, alive, waiting. The night settled heavy over Lone Mesa. Wind scraped along the wooden walls, carrying the dry scent of sage and ash. Inside the cabin, the only light came from the fire, glowing deep orange and throwing long shadows across the room. Boone lay near the door, tail twitching in his sleep. Wyatt sat by the stove, sharpening a knife out of habit more than need. Across from him, Ihawi sat with her knees drawn close, eyes on the flames. Neither had spoken much since the sheriff's visit earlier that day. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, like smoke from a fire long gone out but never forgotten. After a while, Ihawi broke it. "When I was a child," she began quietly, "my father told me that Red Mesa held the bones of our ancestors. He said the spirits lived beneath the copper, guarding it." Wyatt stopped sharpening. The rasp of steel on stone faded. "He was right," she continued. "They came for the copper first. Then they came for us." The fire cracked, spitting small sparks that danced in the air like memories. "They rode in before dawn," she said. "Soldiers, miners, men from town. They said it was for the government, said the land wasn't ours anymore. My father went to talk to them." Her voice faltered. She stared into the flames. "He didn't come back." Wyatt leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He didn't speak. He'd learned long ago that silence could sometimes carry more truth than words. "They burned everything," Ihawi said finally. "The tents, the food, the women who tried to run. I hid under a wagon. That's when I heard him. Him, the man who laughed while it burned." Her eyes lifted to his, dark and unflinching. "I didn't see his face, but I heard his voice. Low, rough, proud. I heard it again today." Wyatt's stomach turned cold. He didn't need her to say the name. "Morris." She nodded. He said, "Let it burn." The words hung there, thick as the desert night. Wyatt stood, pacing once before the stove, his boots creaking against the floorboards. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched near his temple. "That son of a bitch," he muttered. For a long time neither spoke. The fire hissed, the wind moaned through the cracks in the window frame. Then Wyatt crossed to the cabinet in the corner. The hinges groaned as he opened it. From the bottom shelf, he pulled out a small box made from dark cedar. The lid was scorched and uneven, as if it had once survived a blaze. He set it on the table and lifted the lid. Inside was a folded cloth, blackened and torn around the edges. "My wife's," he said quietly. "Her name was Ellen. This was hers." He held it gently, the fabric fragile as old paper. "The day Morris's men raided this place, she was here with our daughter. They said they were after cattle thieves, but there weren't any thieves. Just us." Ihawi watched him carefully. His voice didn't shake, but his eyes had the hollow look of a man who'd seen hell and never really left it. "They shot my horses, burned the barn. Ellen tried to run with the little one. The house caught fire before I could get to them." The knife in his hand slipped slightly. He stared at the blood beading on his thumb, but didn't flinch. "Morris was there," Wyatt continued. "I saw him. He said he'd come to restore order. He stood there while it burned." Ihawi reached out, slowly, carefully, as if touching something sacred. She brushed her fingers over the edge of the charred cloth. "The same man," she whispered. "The same fire." Wyatt nodded. "We both lost everything to him." The two sat in silence again, the firelight flickering between them. Two ghosts staring into the same wound. Outside, the wind rose, howling across the mesa. The boards rattled. Boone lifted his head but didn't bark. Finally, Ihawi spoke again. "You still keep this place standing." He looked around the cabin, the broken table leg, the patched wall, the half-finished fence outside. "Guess I never learned how to quit." She studied him in the light, the calloused hands, the scar across his jaw, the way his eyes carried too much weight for one lifetime. "You're not just a rancher," she said softly. "You build, even when everything's already burned." He gave a dry half-smile. "Doesn't look like much of a builder's life now." "It looks like survival," she replied. Her words sank deep, stirring something long buried beneath his grief. Wyatt leaned back, staring into the fire. "You know, I used to think if I stayed here long enough, I'd hear them again. Ellen and the little one. Maybe in the wind. Maybe in the night." "And do you?" He shook his head. "Just the wind." She gazed at him for a long moment. Then quietly, "My people believe spirits don't speak through the wind. They move through it. Maybe they're not gone. Maybe they led me here." He met her eyes, and for the first time since the raid years ago, something like understanding flickered in his chest. The fire popped, throwing sparks that drifted toward the ceiling and died out in the air. "Maybe you're right," he said finally. "Maybe the dead still have work left to do." She nodded. "Then so do we." For a long time they sat like that. Two broken souls, the silence between them no longer empty, but full of things neither dared say aloud. The flames danced and faded lower. Boone shifted closer to the heat, sighing in his sleep. Wyatt stared at the charred cloth one last time before folding it back into the box. "It's strange," he said quietly, "that what's left of a person can fit in something this small." "Not strange," Ihawi answered. "Just cruel." Her voice held no anger now, only truth. He closed the lid, set the box aside, and looked at her. The firelight caught in her eyes, and for a brief moment, he saw not the woman from the auction block, but the healer her people must have known. The one who'd survived not by hate, but by endurance. "Ihawi," he said slowly, almost unsure. "I didn't buy you." She looked up. "I bought us both a chance, that's all." The fire cracked again, louder this time, like a reply from the night itself. Neither spoke after that. Outside, the desert wind whistled through the fence posts and carried the smell of rain. Rare, but coming. The two sat side by side, faces lit by firelight, haunted and alive. Somewhere deep within the silence, the ghosts beneath the dust began to stir. And for the first time in years, Wyatt Reed didn't feel entirely alone. The desert never slept. Even at night, the wind moved restlessly over the plains, whispering through the sage and rattling the tin roof of Lone Mesa Ranch. Coyotes cried somewhere far off. In the darkness, everything seemed to be waiting for something. Maybe justice, maybe blood. Inside the cabin, Wyatt was fixing the hinge on the door. He'd been quiet all day, but Ihawi knew what was brewing. She'd seen the look in his eyes after the firelight talk, that haunted mix of purpose and doom. He spoke without looking up. "Word'll spread about Morris," he said. "He'll want me silenced before folks start asking questions." Ihawi was mending a torn sleeve near the hearth. "He already started," she said. "I saw two strangers by the river this morning. They watched the ranch like wolves." Wyatt set down his hammer, jaw tightening. "He's planting fear." "Fear works best when truth is close," she replied. Outside, thunder rumbled across the mesa, far away but coming fast. By sundown, the wind carried the first grains of sand. The storm was building. In town, Sheriff Clayton Morris stood beneath the saloon porch, pulling on a cigar. A small crowd gathered around the posted notice nailed to a beam. $500 reward? Wyatt Reed, an Apache woman, wanted for treason and murder. Dead or alive. The paper flapped in the rising wind. Morris exhaled smoke, his smile mean and satisfied. "Let's see how long that righteous bastard can hide in a desert he doesn't own," he muttered. He turned to his deputies. "Round up a few men who can ride through sand. We head out at night. The storm will cover our tracks and his grave." Back at Lone Mesa, the air grew thick and strange. The horizon burned orange with lightning. Boone barked once, short and sharp, then bolted for the barn. Wyatt looked up from the porch, sensing what was coming. He grabbed his rifle, checked the chamber, and met Ihawi's eyes. "You feel that?" She nodded. The storm, and something worse. Then came the sound, distant at first, then closer. The thunder of hooves. Wyatt's heart sank. "Get the horses, now!" Ihawi ran for the corral, her hair whipping in the wind. Lightning flashed, illuminating shapes in the distance. Riders, maybe half a dozen, closing in fast. Wyatt unhitched the two fastest horses, slapping one's flank to wake its spirit. He threw the saddle up as bullets cracked through the night. "Go!" he shouted, pulling Ihawi up behind him as Boone barked furiously from the barn. The storm hit full force, sand whipping like knives across their faces. They rode into the dark. Behind them, the ranch exploded with gunfire. Morris's men stormed through the gates, shouting over the howling wind. The old barn caught fire when a lantern tipped over, flames licking the dry wood until the night glowed red. Wyatt didn't look back. He couldn't. The sandstorm swallowed the world whole. He could barely see 2 feet ahead, only flashes of lightning and the wild glint of Ihawi's eyes as she clung to him. "Which way?" she yelled through the roar. He pointed west. "Canyon Road. There's shelter." A bullet sang past his ear. Another struck the saddle, sending splinters into his arm. He gritted his teeth, pulling the reins hard. "Hold tight!" Dirvonon. They plunged down a narrow trail, hooves slipping on loose rock. The storm screamed around them, fierce and alive. Ihawi turned, fired a pistol she grabbed from Wyatt's holster. One shot, then another. Behind them, a rider's horse stumbled and went down. Wyatt shouted over the wind, "You know how to shoot? Enough to make them stop following." Despite everything, he almost smiled. Then just as lightning split the sky, he saw it. The mouth of a canyon ahead, dark and jagged like the maw of some old god. They pushed through, the wind funneling behind them in a roar. A crack of thunder shook the ground. One of the horses screamed, Wyatt's gelding, struck by a stray bullet. It stumbled and both riders hit the earth hard. The impact knocked the breath from him. Sand filled his mouth, his eyes, his ears. Wyatt! He rolled onto his side, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. The storm raged around them like a living thing. I'm fine, he shouted, though blood ran down his arm. He caught her hand and pulled her toward a low opening in the canyon wall. This way! They stumbled inside. A small cave, barely wide enough for both. The wind shrieked outside, flinging dust through every crack. But the worst of it couldn't reach them here. For a long while they just sat there, gasping, coughing, their faces streaked with dirt and blood. Then Ihawi moved toward him, tearing a strip from her skirt. You're bleeding. It's not bad, he lied. She ignored him, pressing the cloth against his wound. He hissed as the pain bit through. Don't be a fool, she said. You can't fight if you're dead. Her hands were steady, sure. The hands of someone who had done this before. The lamplight from the storm's lightning flickered across her face, fierce and beautiful. Wyatt looked at her. Really looked. The firelight carved her features in gold and shadow. Her eyes held something he hadn't seen in years. Mercy without weakness. She caught him staring. What? He shook his head. Nothing. Just haven't met anyone who doesn't flinch at a wound. She smiled faintly, tightening the bandage. Where I come from, pain is how you know you're still alive. The storm's roar softened to a moan. Rain began to fall. Heavy, sudden, drumming on the canyon walls. Wyatt leaned back against the stone, breathing slow. Guess the desert finally got tired of being dry. Ihawi sat beside him, listening to the rhythm of the rain. Sometimes, she said softly, the sky does that. It remembers. He turned to her. Remembers what? That once it used to be kind. Her words lingered in the air. Outside, thunder rolled across the land, echoing like cannon fire. But inside the cave, the sound grew almost gentle, like a heartbeat. Wyatt let out a long breath. I spent years thinking God forgot this place. Maybe he didn't, she said. Maybe he just waited for someone to listen. He stared at her, unable to find words. The desert, the fire, the ghosts, everything he'd carried for years felt smaller in that moment, like dust washed clean by rain. Her eyes met his again, calm and steady. Sometimes the storm doesn't come to destroy us, Wyatt. It comes to make us stop running, to look back. He nodded slowly, her words sinking deep. Ihawi, he said, his voice low, rough. You think there's still a road back for people like us? She smiled sadly. Only if we build it ourselves. The rain outside poured harder, filling the canyon with silver sound. For a long time, they said nothing. Two broken souls huddled in a hollow of rock, sharing breath and silence while the world howled beyond. And somewhere in that storm, between thunder and rain, something in both of them began to shift. Not peace yet, not love, but the start of something that felt a lot like hope. Dawn crept over the desert like a wounded thing. The storm had passed, but the land still steamed with rain and dust. The air smelled of wet earth and gunpowder, sharp and alive. Wyatt woke first. His shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, but he pushed through the pain. Ihawi was still asleep beside the embers of their small fire, her dark hair clinging to her face, her chest rising slow and steady. He stepped to the mouth of the cave, scanning the canyon below. The light was gray-blue, the kind that blurs shapes and hides danger. But he could feel it. The storm hadn't washed away all their problems. Morris would be coming. Boone padded up beside him, ears twitching, nose lifted to the wind. Wyatt crouched, rubbed the dog's neck. Yeah, boy, he whispered. They're close. Behind him, Ihawi stirred. You heard them? Not yet, he said, but I can smell trouble before it rides. She joined him at the opening. The rain had left streaks of red mud down the canyon walls. Water dripped from every ledge, gathering into streams that twisted through the rocks like veins. We can't stay here, she said quietly. He nodded. We won't. But first, I've got a score to settle." By mid-morning, Sheriff Clayton Morris was on their trail. He rode at the front of 6 men, faces half covered by scarves, their horses slick with rain and dust. Morris's hat brim was pulled low, his badge dull under the storm's gray light. He looked up at the canyon ahead, steep, narrow, carved by centuries of wind and flood. A dangerous place to ride, but he didn't care. "Reed's cornered," he said. "The only way out of that canyon's through me." One deputy spat. "He's a dead man already." Morris grinned, slow and mean. "Then let's make it official." They spurred forward, hooves splashing through the mud. From their hiding spot behind a ledge of slick red rock, Wyatt watched the riders enter the canyon. He rested his rifle barrel on a boulder, steady as stone. Ihawi crouched beside him, revolver ready, eyes sharp. Rainwater dripped from the brim of her hat, running down her jaw like sweat. "6 men," she whispered. "Maybe 7 if he brought a tracker." "6 and a coward," Wyatt muttered. "I'll take Morris myself." "Don't let anger make you blind." He gave a short, dry laugh. "Darlin', anger's all that's kept me breathing this long." She didn't smile back. Instead, she laid a hand on his arm. "Then let me be your eyes." The words sank deep. He gave a small nod. Then the shooting started. The first shot echoed like thunder. A deputy tumbled off his horse, rifle spinning into the mud. The others shouted, firing blindly up at the cliffs. Bullets sparked against the rocks, fragments flying like angry bees. Wyatt moved with cold precision, each shot deliberate. He'd been a rancher, not a soldier, but the frontier had taught him to shoot straight and waste nothing. Ihawi covered his flank, crouched low, firing between bursts of thunder. Boone barked once, then took off into the ravine, drawing fire away from their position. "Go, Boone!" Wyatt shouted, reloading. Rain began to fall again, light at first, then heavier, until it hissed off the rocks like steam. The canyon grew darker, slicker, the sound of hoofbeats drowned by the rising roar of water. Morris's men tried to climb the slope, but the mud betrayed them. One slipped, fell hard, and disappeared into the rushing stream below. "Damn this place!" Morris yelled, firing upward. "You can't hide forever, Reed." Wyatt's voice came back, calm and steady. "Wasn't hiding, just waiting." He fired while the bullet clipped Morris's hat clean off his head. The sheriff ducked behind his horse, cursing. Lightning cracked across the sky, lighting his face pale as bone. Then came a new sound. Deep, rolling, unnatural. Ihawi froze. "Wyatt!" He turned. At the far end of the canyon, a wall of brown water was building. A flash flood, tearing loose from the upper mesa. The storm had filled the gullies, and now the land was giving it back all at once. "Move!" he shouted. "Now!" The flood roared down the canyon like a living thing. Horses screamed, men shouted. Morris turned just in time to see one of his deputies swept off his saddle. Wyatt grabbed Ihawi's arm, pulling her up the side of the cliff. The mud was slick, the rain blinding. Boone scrambled ahead, barking. Behind them, chaos, men firing uselessly, swallowed by the torrent. The water hit with a deafening crash, filling the canyon from wall to wall. Morris clung to a boulder, face twisted in rage and fear. He saw Wyatt and Ihawi climbing, their silhouettes against the storm. "You think this changes anything?" he roared, voice drowned by the water. "You're still done, Reed. You'll drown with her." Wyatt didn't look back. He just climbed. Halfway up, a rifle shot cracked. One last desperate bullet from Morris. It struck the rock near Wyatt's hand, showering him with stone. Then the flood took the sheriff. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone, swept into the churning brown river below. By the time Wyatt and Ihawi reached the rim, their bodies were shaking with exhaustion. They collapsed onto the wet ground, gasping for air. Boone lay beside them, panting, fur soaked and heavy. The storm raged one last time. Lightning across the black sky, thunder rolling through the mesas. Rain lashed their faces, mixing with sweat and blood. For a long while, neither spoke. They just breathed, alive against all odds. Finally, Ihawi lifted her face to the sky. Water streamed down her cheeks, washing away the dust, the grime, the fear. "The rain doesn't ask if we're white or Apache," she said softly. It just washes away the blood. Wyatt looked at her, the defiance in her jaw, the strength in her eyes. He wanted to say something, but words felt too small for what they'd survived. He reached out, resting a hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Down below, the floodwaters still raged, carrying pieces of the past away into the desert. The wind shifted, cold but clean, and for the first time in years, Wyatt Reed felt the weight in his chest begin to lift. Above them, the clouds began to break apart, revealing a sliver of pale blue sky. They sat there in silence, the rain softening to a whisper. Boone pressed close, head against Wyatt's leg. Ihawi turned to him, her voice barely louder than the wind. "We lived." "Yeah," he said, breathing out. "For now." Then she smiled, small, tired, but real. "Sometimes for now is enough." Wyatt nodded. "Sometimes it's everything." The desert stretched wide before them, washed clean, alive again. The canyon below was still red with mud and blood, but the rain kept falling, soft as mercy. And for the first time, the land didn't feel like a grave. The wind had calmed. For the first time in what felt like years, the land around Lone Mesa breathed quietly again. The scars of the storm still ran deep. Blackened fence posts, a barn half collapsed, ashes where the old corral once stood. But the sky was clear now, wide and clean, stretching forever over the red mesas. Wyatt stood on the porch that morning, hat pulled low against the light. His shoulder ached when he moved, but it was a good kind of pain, the kind that reminded him he was still here. Boone lay beside him, tail thumping lazily against the boards. Down by the field, Ihawi was already at work. Her dark braids swayed as she lifted a post from the pile, steady and sure. Wyatt watched her a long time before joining her. "Sun's barely up," he said. "Then we've got time before it gets cruel," she replied, her voice calm and dry as the wind. He smiled. "You talk like someone who knows this land." "I do," she said. "It doesn't give second chances, but sometimes it lets you borrow one." Wyatt picked up a hammer, lining the post with his boot. "Then let's not waste it." For the next few hours, they worked in silence. Two silhouettes moving across the ruined pasture, rebuilding what had once been his pride. The sound of metal on wood echoed across the mesa, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Every few minutes, Boone would trot by, sniffing the ground, tail high. The smell of fresh-cut cedar mixed with the sweetness of wet soil left by the rain. It wasn't much, a stretch of fence no longer than a wagon's length, but it was something. When they stopped to rest, Ihawi leaned against the rail, looking toward the horizon. The morning light turned the desert gold, catching the edges of her hair. "Why rebuild it?" she asked softly. "You know the wind will take it down again someday." Wyatt wiped the sweat from his brow with his sleeve, thinking, "Because it's not about keeping things in or out anymore. It's about finishing what I started." She turned to him, studying his face. "You never finished it because you were alone." He met her eyes. "Maybe that's true." He tapped the post with his hammer, smiling faintly. "But I ain't alone now, am I?" Ihawi's lips curved just slightly. "No, you're not." They worked until the sun climbed high, baking the mud into hard red clay. When the last post of the day was set, Wyatt dropped the hammer into the dirt and leaned back, surveying the line. "It's crooked," Ihawi said. He chuckled. "So am I." Boone barked once, as if in agreement. Wyatt sat down on an overturned bucket, pulling off his gloves. His hands were raw again, blistered, scarred, alive. Ihawi poured water into a tin cup and handed it to him. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, watching the fence shimmer in the heat. "In my tribe, when someone builds after great loss, we say they're calling the spirits to see that they're still standing." "Think they're watching?" he asked. "They never stopped." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw not the woman from the auction block, not the survivor of fire and storm, but the strength that had carried both of them through. "You ever think," he said slowly, "maybe the things we lose are just waiting for us to find them again? In different forms?" She tilted her head, considering. "Maybe, or maybe they find us first." Wyatt smiled faintly. "Guess I can live with that." As the day faded into orange, the two walked back toward the house. The cabin still smelled faintly of smoke, the roof patched with scavenged tin. Boone led the way, his paws leaving soft prints in the damp ground. Inside, the air was warm from the stove. Ihawi lit a small lamp and set it on the table. The same table that had survived the raid, its surface scarred but sturdy. Wyatt sat down slowly, staring at the flickering light. "Funny thing," he said. "All those years I thought this place was cursed, but maybe it was just waiting for someone to share it with." Ihawi set a plate of beans and bread in front of him. "A land cursed by greed can still be healed by hands that build," she said. He looked at her, smiling tiredly. "You always talk like that?" "Only when someone's listening," he laughed, a quiet, low sound that seemed to startle even him. Boone lifted his head from under the table and wagged his tail. That night, after the lamp burned low, Wyatt stepped outside. The stars spread across the sky like spilled silver. The wind carried the faint cry of an owl from somewhere far down the valley. He leaned against the porch post, one of the few still standing, and watched the new fence line glint faintly in the moonlight. Ihawi came out a moment later, wrapped in a blanket. "Can't sleep?" "Not used to the quiet," he said. She stood beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "Quiet doesn't mean alone." He nodded. "No, I reckon it doesn't." They stood that way for a while, saying nothing. The land was still, the kind of stillness that only comes after everything's been broken and remade. Finally, Wyatt spoke. "You know, I used to think the fence was just a boundary, something to keep what's mine safe from what ain't. But now," she looked at him. "Now what?" He smiled, eyes soft. "Now I think it's just a line we draw to remind ourselves where to begin again." The next morning, dawn spilled over the mesa in a slow flood of gold. Boone barked, chasing a jackrabbit through the brush. The air was cool, sweet with dew. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. Wyatt hitched the last wire on the fence and stood back, watching the sun rise behind it. Ihawi joined him, her hands resting lightly on the post. "It's straight now," she said. He grinned. "Guess even a crooked man can get one thing right." She laughed softly, a sound that felt like the wind's first warmth after winter. The sky burned brighter. A single horse neighed from the barn, the old gelding that had survived the fire. Its breath rose in pale clouds against the morning. Wyatt turned to Ihawi, his voice quiet. "You ever wonder what comes next?" She gazed at the endless stretch of desert before them. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." He nodded, then said, "Either way, we'll build it together." The sun climbed higher, flooding the land with light. From a distance, the ranch looked small, almost fragile. Just two figures working side by side, a weathered dog, and a few lines of fence cutting across the vast emptiness. But up close, it was something else entirely. It was defiance. It was grace. It was the start of something new. And as the wind picked up again, tugging at his hat and her braid, Wyatt smiled. "Guess this fence ain't meant to end," he said. "No," Ihawi replied, her eyes glinting in the light. "It's meant to last." The camera of the world pulled back, the mesa glowing under the morning sun, the two of them standing tall amid the wreckage and rebirth of everything they'd been through. Somewhere beyond, the desert whispered, carrying away the last echoes of gunfire, leaving only peace. And a voice, low, steady, almost like Wyatt's own, could be heard in the wind. "In a land where cruelty once ruled, two souls chose kindness instead. One who bought freedom and one who sold her faith. Together, they built something called hope.